mean, I'd like to think that with every change a person goes through, they become a different person. You know, if it's a little change, it's a little different. If it's a big change, it's a big difference. So through some of those changes, I would make markers, you know, and then eventually, years later, after my dad died, thought of where I would be buried, and so it's like I'm going to be cremated and buried here. So this is like my grave marker now. So it's kind of neat that that early storyline still continued.
So I'm here in Brownsville, Tennessee, and behind me is what's called the Mindfield. I had driven past this probably a couple years ago and made a mental note that at some point I need to come back here and figure out what's going on with this place. So after a little bit of searching around, like it's not open to the public in the sense that there's not like a big entrance. You don't pay a ticket or anything. It's just walled off, and there's this little side entrance, and I just went in here. I talked to the guy who built it. His name is Billy Tripp. He was nice enough to let me walk around, film it, and then I sat down for an interview with him. So if you'd like to see that, continue watching along. Where'd the name Mindfield come from?
Well, I grew up in that house that I told you about in my early 20s when I was thinking about what to do. I'd often sit behind it and kind of have that field in front of me, you know, I just do a lot of thinking. And I soon wrote a book, an autobiographical book that's set in that house. It kind of tells that story. And that big back field behind it kind of plays a part in the book, and it comes to somewhat be a stage for his ideas or thoughts to kind of take on names, and you know, to act out their, you know, instead of saying I did this or I thought this and I answered, you know, I just give parts of myself different names and have them. So that was the Mindfield. I don't know where it came back. I mean, it just seemed to appropriate. It seemed to apply, you know. And after I got the book and then really found this, that was my dad on that site, you know. And so I decided that's where I wanted to put this larger structure that I was thinking about building. Well, that was the steel minefield, or the metal minefield, of the second part of life, I'd say. So it just came from growing up.
What was the first thing that you built?
It was a rudimentary framework in the front. Local business burned, and it had some structural beams in it that were not hurt, and I cleaned it up and got the beams, and so I just built a little framework. I had smaller stuff stored down there on the ground, you know, and I thought, well, I'll build a little framework and put this smaller stuff on it. And it kind of grew from there. I mean, I liked it well enough that I just started leaning that way, leaning into it. I had a car wash which was over here. It's still operating, but I rent it out now. But see, I had that for 35 years. Well, not then. I'd had it for maybe 10 years. You know, that made my living. Yes. You know, I didn't have a lot of expense, didn't have a wife or children, and was able to. The car wash was a good job and supported me well. I was making smaller stuff. Like I said, I had it stored down here, and just the last stuff I made had kind of spread out on the ground. And I was kind of getting bigger and bigger, so it was kind of just a natural
it was
step.
you never You didn't start with this in mind.
No, I was making smaller stuff. I had, before then, I had two series that I worked in, and the first was like stick men, just like a child would draw, and I got kind of abstract with it. And then the second one was grave markers. I grew up in the house that's, you could step outside here and see the trees on the other side of the grocery store. And there was a big back field behind it, and then a street, and then the city cemetery, which is over here. So I mean, I liked the idea of cemeteries, but it's kind of neat that that early storyline still continued. And I had several storylines. The first one was like an outdoor church because the structure, early structure started looking like buildings do that have a steel substructure or superstructure, I don't know what it, underneath it, before they start. Mm-hmm. And I always liked the looks of those things. And mine was beginning to look that way, and I liked the idea of a church, although I'm not religious, but church is then impressed. I grew up in a church, and it always struck me as being special, and I like to think that being here is kind of special. So I kind of it was a long, narrow lot, so it looked like kind of a long sanctuary. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that was a storyline.
It's always impressive when I see somebody who's dedicated such a huge amount of time to their art with no expectation of reward in it, just for its own sake. So what's your advice to be able to get to the point where you can genuinely love what you're doing without that expectation of anything coming from it?
Well, I have high expectations, but for rewards, and they fucking better come daily, and they do. But it's from what I do and what I get back from it. I'm getting a well-spent day. I'm getting a sense that I've spent the day well in meaningful engagement and have something to show for it. Having something to show for it, I like, and that means having it dealing, and that means investing in things, the material world. Mm-hmm. Now that I'm sure you can take that too far, and some ideas of worth might argue that you shouldn't invest in the concrete world. But except for me, in my opinion, that's all there is. Except for me, Mm-hmm. I can't speak for you and all that, but I mean, you're a part of the concrete world. But and I only try. The more I can invest and work and wake up every day to those aspects of the concrete world that I have some influence over or control, the better. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, it's out of my hands. Other people will bring their own selves to it and see a lot of them in it, I'm sure, just like they do with a book or a movie. An architect or a mathematician or a plumber will see things that that I won't see. And I don't know. I mean, I just hope it's positive. I mean, I don't want. I'd rather it be positive than negative.